afternoon, dear distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you here today at the book lunch organized by the Danube Institute. My name is Virág Lőrinc. First of all, let me introduce our welcome speakers, who will be István Kiss, the Executive Director of the Danube Institute, followed by Jeffrey Kaplan, who is a Senior Distinguished Fellow at the Danube Institute, and Ambassador Jakov Hadas-Handelsman, who is the Israeli ambassador to Hungary.
Thank you, Virág, for the kind introduction. Dear ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency, I would like to first make a short thank you to His Excellency Jakov Hadas-Handelsman for being with us here today and gracing us with his presence. I would also like to give a special thanks to my colleagues who made this book possible. Of course, foremost Jeffrey Kaplan, our distinguished fellow, but also all the researchers who've been involved in this book. Sharon, Sofia, Tamás, Virág, Lydia, hope I'm not missing anybody out. Some of them are not even with us as researchers. They moved on to other institutions, but I think all of them put in tremendous work into this book, so we're very grateful for their work, and without them this book wouldn't have been possible to publish, I believe. It's a great privilege to be here with you today and host this very important event. I say important because, sadly, if we look at international surveys, anti-Semitism is on the rise now in the world. Sadly, this anti-Semitism is now mostly in the rise in Western European countries and countries like America, where it's not just anti-Semitic attitudes which are on rise. Sadly, physical violence is also on the rise. And there's perhaps a new phenomenon which we partly discussed with His Excellency as well, that there's a new form of anti-Semitism which is mostly manifesting itself as anti-Israel sentiment or sentiment against the state of Israel. Now, I do believe that there's not enough talk about anti-Semitism in general, but perhaps this new form of anti-Semitism in, let's say, the Western discourse. I believe that we hear less than we should about this phenomenon, so that's why I'm happy that we have this event and have the time to talk about these important issues. I also think that in this turmoil, Hungary can be a form of beacon and a hope to Jewish people. Because it would seem that Jewish religious life is now flourishing, and luckily physical violence against Jews in Hungary is at a historic low. Despite this, we still hear that Hungary is this overtly anti-Semitic country, which I'm hoping is not true, but also it begs the question, what is the truth? So where lies the truth? Is Hungary this horrible anti-Semitic place, as, let's say, New York Times would like us to believe, or a beacon where Jews live a happy life? I think if you want to know the truth, you have to look at this book, which is presented to you today, because it really is showing a clear picture about Hungary. It demonstrates that Jews now in Hungary have a much better life than they did, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago, but it also shows that there's still work to do. We're not saying that Hungary is not an anti-Semitic country in a sense, that there is anti-Semitism in Hungary. Luckily, it's lower than it has been historically, but still, people held anti-Semitic views, so there's still things we have to fight, so to speak. And there's also this new phenomenon which I partly discussed, where it would seem that in, let's say, Western Europe and America, anti-Semitic attitudes are still fairly low, but sadly physical attacks are high. While, let's say, in Hungary and Poland, luckily physical attacks are almost non-existent, or at least very low, but anti-Semitic attitudes are still fairly high compared to, let's say, the UK or America. So there is still work to do, and that's why I'm happy that we're hosting events like this book launch, where we can, I would say, candidly and openly talk about these issues. And I'm also very happy to see that we could, as we did with our previous conference on anti-Semitism in Hungary could bring together most of the very diverse and colorful Hungarian Jewish civil society. I think this is a very important fact, and I would like to do that in the future as well. I very much hope that we can work closely together with all these organizations and, of course, with the embassy on researching and combating anti-Semitism in Hungary and, of course, generally in Europe in the future as well. So once again, it's a privilege being here with you. Thank you for all the speakers and all our guests, and I hope to see you on one of our next events as well. Thank you.
Now let me introduce Jeffrey Kaplan, who is the Senior Distinguished Fellow of the Danube Institute, to make his welcome speech.
Thank you. Your Excellency Ambassador Hadas Handelsman, researchers and staff of the Danube Institute and the Helena Historical Press, who publish the volumes in the US and in Hungary. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to you all, and thank you for coming to our book launch and conference. I would like to say a few words about our volumes, about how the research for anti-Semitism in Hungary, appearance and reality came about. The initial idea for research into Hungarian anti-Semitism came about through conversations with our researchers shortly after my arrival in Hungary in 2019. In those days, we had little else to do but kitchen table talk, as the Russians would say. The COVID pandemic, which for a time had spared Hungary, would within months hit the country full force, and the lockdown soon followed. I was eager to begin the research regardless, and in fact was somewhat surprised at the enthusiasm for the research on the part of our researchers and on the part of the administration of the Institute. My impression before moving to Budapest, based entirely on a steady diet of Western media reports, was that Hungarian Jews had much to fear, and that moreover the problem was exacerbated, if not outright incited, by Fidesz and Prime Minister Orbán for political gain. My Hungarian researchers assured me this was not the case. For its part, the Institute was enthusiastic about carrying the research forward. This was fine with me. We would follow the data and publish whatever the evidence showed. Given the lockdown, though, the question was how to proceed. Virtually all of my research projects over the years have involved some sort of participant observer research. While we would delve deeply into the academic, NGO, and media materials, the real data would come from the Jewish community itself. Who would know better? The subject was quite new for all of us, as none of us is actually Jewish, and few of the researchers had any direct contact with the Hungarian Jewish community. I had a working knowledge of Judaism as a faith and had studied more deeply the history of the Jews from the Second Temple period through the diaspora. But beyond media reports, I had no actual knowledge of Hungarian Jewry. So despite these limitations, we set out on what would be a 2-year odyssey, and which we all learned a great deal. We did a number of initial interviews, primarily by Zoom, with academics and NGOs in Israel and the US. Rabbi Andrew Baker, the Director of International Jewish Affairs at the American Jewish Committee, was particularly helpful at this stage, as was Sebastian Rejak, the Interim Director of the AJC's Central European Office in Warsaw. Professor Yehuda Hartman from Bar Ilan University, who is here today, and Professor Andras Kovacs, also here from Central European University. Both provided much-needed academic background on Hungarian Judaism. With the lifting of the lockdown, we set out in earnest to interview community members and leaders. That produced the next surprise, which shouldn't have been a surprise. The Jewish community in Hungary, in common with Jewish communities throughout the world, was divided into not always terribly amicable sectors. And as interviewing became deeper, these cleavages became ever sharper. Despite these divisions, we were received with openness and hospitality by all, for which we are all most grateful. over the course of more than 30 meetings and formal interviews. We were given a view of the Jewish community and the problem of anti-Semitism in Hungary, which is reflected in the 2 volumes of Anti-Semitism in Hungary, Appearance and Reality. The community leaders that we spoke to are many, but we are particularly grateful for the kindness and support of the chief rabbi of Hungary, Rabbi Robert Freilich, Rabbi Baruch Oberlander, the head of the Orthodox Rabbinate of Budapest and of the Chabad Lubavitcher movement in Hungary, Rabbi Shlomo Kovesh, head of EMI, the leaders of such Hungarian monitoring organizations as Action and Protection, and many more. Thank you all. What followed was a 2-day international conference held at the Academy of Science on June 29th, 30th, 2021. This was the first post-pandemic conference to be held in Budapest, and the attendance and public interest was gratifying, to say the least. Then, as now, His Excellency Ambassador Hadas Handelsman was kind enough to open the conference. Tristan Azbey, State Secretary for the Aid to Persecuted Christians and the Hungary Helps Program, represented the Hungarian government. And present, too, were leaders of all of the sectors of the Hungarian Jewish community, as well as Hungarian and foreign representatives of concerned NGOs and academic specialists from the US, the EU, and from Israel. Volume 1 of Anti-Semitism in Hungary contains the transcripts of all the addresses at the conference, as well as a number of academic studies on the history and contemporary reality of the Hungarian Jewish community. Volume 2 consists of in-depth interviews with the leaders of the Hungarian Jewish community, and again, a selection of academic articles. Together, I believe they represent a valuable resource on Hungarian Judaism today and the problem of anti-Semitism in Hungary, then and now. The project, and in particular the conference, as you can imagine, was immensely expensive and required a considerable commitment on behalf of the small staff of the Danube Institute. We are extremely grateful to the Lajos Bocsiani Foundation for underwriting so ambitious a project, to John O'Sullivan and István Kish, who supported it, and to the staff of the Danube Institute, past and present, for the work and indeed the passion they put into the conference and the project as a whole. Our findings, at least to me, if not to my researchers, were quite surprising. The public displays of anti-Semitism that were so marked a decade ago, with the rising influence of Jobbik, the floating of the Jewish list, and the anti-Semitic and anti-Roma violence of the Hungarian Guard, are gone from the streets. The Guard itself was banned, as were public expressions of anti-Semitism. In a crowning irony, Jobbik contested the last election with the opposition center-left United for Hungary coalition and were crushed at the polls. While the Jewish community is as politically diverse as the rest of the Hungarian electorate, what all did agree on was that the situation was immensely better than it had been. In fact, in 2022, the European Jewish Association named Hungary and Italy as the friendliest places in Europe for Jews to live and visit. And no wonder. In stark contrast to the situations in France, Germany, Belgium, the UK, and indeed in the US, Jews here are safe to walk the streets and are able to worship without being afraid or having to employ a heavy security presence. In sum, we followed the data, and the data dictated the findings. I had to greatly revise my hypothesis about the prevalence of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic violence in Hungary. Finally, we come to the moment I most dreaded in my welcoming speech at the 2021 conference. Individual thanks to our researchers and staff members. I practiced that part of the speech infinitely more than the address itself. For if truth be told, after a little more than a year in Hungary, I found Hungarian names and their pronunciations to be a formidable challenge. I hope I do better now. You will be the judge. Of the 5 associate editors of the book, Only 2 are still with the Danube Institute. Lydia Papp, who now works with us in an administrative capacity, and Sharon Sugar, who did so much to organize this event. Please. But just as much else has changed over the last 3 years, her name then was Morvai, which was my pronunciational nemesis. I could not pronounce that name to kill me, but I hope it's better now. Zsofia Totpiro organized much of the 2021 conference and virtually all of the fieldwork, and with Tomasz Orban, wrote the excellent introduction to Volume 2. David Nudge was very much part of the research, but departed for the world of business shortly before the publication of the first volume. Many of the key figures who made the Anti-Semitism in Hungary conference possible are no longer with the Institute, but that conference would not have been possible without the work of Dordina Dosha, who also took part in the research end, whenever she could, and to Rebecca Ilyesh, who handled the communication aspects of the event. Finally, my thanks to our MC for the evening, Virag Lorenz, who joined us after the anti-Semitism research, but is a driving force in our current research project, Attacks on Christian Communities and Institutions. This is a global study which, with the assistance of Hungary Helps, will feature field work in the EU, the Middle East, and East Africa. Thanks, too, to Peter Morvai, who has been a great resource throughout the research project, is incidentally Sharon's father, and is invaluable today for translating for us in this conference. And in closing, a very American entrepreneurial note, which I'm embarrassed to say, but will do nonetheless. Both volumes of Anti-Semitism in Hungary, Appearance and Reality, are available at the Helena Press booth in the back. They're available from Amazon.com, at bestsellers here in Budapest and other Budapest bookstores as well. We very much appreciate your being here to take part in our book launch and conference. Our speakers have much to share, so I will not take up any more of their time. Thank you all very much.
We have the honor to have His Excellency Ambassador Jakub Hadas-Handelsman among us today. So please make your welcome speech.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me here to be part of the research launching, and I feel a little bit, I'm part of it because I was the one who opened it with this, my lecture at the time, and now, in a way, I seal it with this welcome speech. It's not a speech, it's some words. Now, first of all, I'm very, very happy that this research was finished and conducted, and I think that it can shed a light about a country in Europe where anti-Semitism is being dealt with. It's being dealt with heads-on, and in a way, it is also very successful. It was already mentioned here about the various surveys, like the EJA, I think Mr. Kaplan mentioned it, that says that for a practicing Jew to live a Jewish life in Europe these days, the best places are, all the accumulations are Italy and Hungary. And this is very, very good for Hungary, but it's very bad for us as Jews, because who could have believed that that 21st century, the third millennium, in the year of 2023 already, we still discuss anti-Semitism, and it's Europe. And even when we talk about Europe, one would have thought that in Germany, where the wishes act of everything emerged from, things would be different today, and anti-Semitism would not have had any legitimacy, or it doesn't have legitimacy, but it has certainly place in German society, and it's not like this. So in a way, ladies and gentlemen, anti-Semitism is something, it's a lifetime job, because it existed, it exists, and if I am not wrong, I wish to be wrong, but I don't think that I will be wrong, it will still continue to exist. It changes forms and shapes, and it was already mentioned here in Dr. Kish's speech. I will touch upon it in a few minutes. Then you have new forms and new shapes, but it's there. And in my humble opinion, anti-Semitism, it's not only anti-Semitism, it's not limited only to anti-Semitism, it's anti-something. And as I always say to people in Europe, of course, it's the interest of the Jewish people, first of all, that anti-Semitism disappears. But also, it's the interest of the non-Jews in Europe or in the Western Hemisphere. Why? Because anti-something might start with anti-Semitism, because everybody knows anti-Semitism. Everybody's been fed by the media, fake news, and so on, especially these days. But it never stops there. And when there are no Jews to deal with anymore, then you turn on something else. It could be anti-black, anti-this, anti-that, anti-migration, anti-Muslims, anti. There will always be something that could be attached to this proverb, or in a way of life, which is anti-something. So we need to fight it. We need to fight it, and there are two, from my humble experience, there are two. You have to fight it. The fight against it is a two-tier track. On the one hand, education for the future generations. On the other hand, law and order enforcement. And so if there is a violation, then it should be dealt with seriously. So zero tolerance policy towards anti-Semitism should be implemented everywhere, because in most cases, in most of the countries that I know, there is a legislation against anti-Semitism and so on. But then you start, okay, is it anti-Semitism or not? But anyway, we need to deal with it, and we need to deal with it in a strict and serious, because it threatens life in the civilized world. And as I said, it's not limited to Jews also. Now, I would like to say a few words about the new kind of anti-Semitism. It's not politically correct today to be anti-Semitic. It's not, you don't find in broad daylight people who would be ready to expose themselves and endanger themselves by saying, I'm anti-Semitic. No, this is not going to happen, or it doesn't happen that frequently, but on the other hand, it's very popular to come and say, I'm anti-Israeli. I'm only criticizing Israel. Why? What's wrong? Can't I criticize Hungary the same way I can criticize Hungary or the United States or the UK or Germany? I can criticize Israel. What's the problem? I'm anti-Semitic? Now, ladies and gentlemen, over 30 years ago, when I was a young diplomat, and promising, I hope, in Vienna, it was at the end of 1990, and it was obvious that the Americans' ultimatum to Saddam Hussein to pull out of Kuwait was not going to be implemented. So the Americans have set a date, 15th of January 1991, and it was obvious that they were going to attack. Now, all my friends in the democratic, pluralistic, social network in Vienna, of course, were against the war. They were against the war because of lots of reasons. And Saddam Hussein, if those who are not young enough to remember, will remember that Saddam Hussein was trying to delay things and was trying to combat the United States on the psychological arena by giving all kinds of excuses. Why did he invade Kuwait? And one day he came out with this excuse that he invaded Kuwait and robbed Kuwait, by the way, only as a symbol, or to draw the attention of the world to the fact that Israel was occupying the Palestinian territory since 1967, denying the Palestinians from their legitimate rights. And he says, if Israel only gave me an indication, I don't need even a written document, only give me the indication The Prime Minister was our Prime Minister Shamir. He said, if Shamir gives an indication that Israel intends to pull out of the territories and to give the Palestinian an independent state, only an indication, some kind of a commitment, immediately I pull out of Kuwait. And ladies and gentlemen, you know, we are in the academia, but people are ready to believe everything, and people, that's also part of the academia, people are ready to believe everything, and especially when it suits their thoughts and when it comes down their fears. And there was a big campaign in Austria against Israel. Again, Israel and its policy are the stumbling block between world peace and war. So, again, the Israelis have been, and suddenly you start hearing these theories about, 6 days war. I was a child when 6 days war happened, but I still remember the facts and the sequence of events. What can I do? I'm old enough. Now, everything has to change, Israel. And I told these guys, and there were some few people who tried to tell people the truth, so they were immediately defined as warmongers. And I told these people that this is anti-Semitism. They said, we are anti-Semit? How dare you say, someone says I'm a socialist, the other one said I'm communist, the third one said I'm agnostic, fourth one said I'm atheistic, there's no God. How can I be anti-Semitic? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, today we know more than those days that you can be anti-Semitic even if you are a Semitic or even if you don't think that there is God. So it's not on a religious basis, because the church was persecuting the Jews because of the sin and whatever, but it's because of other reasons. So today it's symbolized mostly by the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, sanctions, the movement that has made it a goal to make Israel pull out of the territories and give the Palestinians their own independent state. But if you serve, this is what they want us to know. So it's actually what's the problem here? You can be, just want Israelis. It's good for the Israelis to do it, okay? But if you go and serve in their internet website, you don't have to deep dive in order to find the reality, because they have three basic conditions for their goals. First of all, immediate pull of all the territory. Second, to stop discriminating all its citizens. And third, to make sure that the right solution to the conflict is that all the Palestinian refugees from 1948 will not only go back, but will go back to the original places where they were living before the war started in 1948, which this, ladies and gentlemen, means the destruction of the state of Israel as the state of the nation state of the Jewish people. Now, I don't know any other country in the world that people are questioning the right to exist, the right to define the nation, to define itself as a nation, and. Do you know? I only know one country, which is Israel. And for this reason, from my point of view, this is pure anti-Semitism. And say, no, I am entitled to criticize the state of Israel because this is democracy. Yeah, you're ready to criticize the policy of the state of Israel. We Israelis are more criticizing our own policies than any other person on earth. But what they're doing, this is purely anti-Semitism, because nobody of us denies the right of Israel or questions the right of Israel to exist, as I said before, and I don't want to repeat it. Now, if you take someone like Roger Waters, Pink Floyd, who started also by saying, I'm anti-Israeli. Some of my best friends are Jews. Come on, how can I be anti-Semitic? But now, the mask was torn out from his face, and he's talking now about the nature of the Jews. Not only that he sides with Putin and Ukrainians are Nazis, and the Jews are part of the world, the conspiracy. So he was defined the day before yesterday by the council of the city of Frankfurt, because he was supposed to having a concert there. They have canceled the concert. They have defined him as one, if not the biggest anti-Semite in this generation. But he's anti-Israeli, he's not anti-Semitic. So this is the danger, this is the challenge that we are facing. This is what I wanted to say. And the other thing is that it's more sophisticated than people might think, because the new anti-Semitism is not, again, we're talking about perceptions in the past. What is an anti-Semite? It's the local redneck, religious, Christian, and uneducated. Of course, they really believe that the Jews killed Jesus, and the Jews, they need to have the blood of the Christian children to make the matzot, to bake the matzot in Pesach, and so on and so forth. Today I'm talking about something which is much more sophisticated, if only for the fact that the people who are perpetrators of the new anti-Semitism are educated, highly educated people. If you look at this anti-Semitism wave that erupted as a result of the virus, of the pandemic, when they started to talk about the Jews, first they create the disease, then they create the antidote, then they keep the antidote, spread the disease, and then cash in a lot of money for the antidote. Look at Pfizer. We all do know who owns Pfizer, don't we? Inverted, quote unquote. And those people are university professors. They are highly educated people. They are very prominent businessmen, industrialists, and so on. So it's not the ignorant people who do not have any idea what a Jew looks like. Because I still have friends that came to Israel from the diaspora, and in Catholic countries, a friend of mine told me that his sister went to college, and the dormitory she was with a Christian student, and she looked at her in a very bizarre way when they went to sleep. So they got dressed, they changed and said, "What are you looking?" She said, "Well, I wanted to see whether it's true that you still have the leftover of a tail. The Jews has tails. So when you take on your pajamas, you can look and see whether there is something looks like a tail." I swear to God, it's a real story. But today we have a business with something which is more sophisticated, so it needs to be new. I'm sure that there are already people who are rethinking about how to meet these challenges, and who am I to give them their advice. But anyway, this is my contribution to this ceremony. So well done, and hopefully we won't be needing to exert too many efforts in fighting anti-Semitism. I wish it was true, but well, let's hope. Thank you very much.